Welcome back to another story, one that begins with a hammer strike echoing across a dusty western town, where a nameless woman stood trembling under the noon sun. Her face was hidden beneath a burlap sack, her wrists bound. No one knew who she was, and no one cared, except for one man, a rugged lumberjack named Elias Crane, who hadn't spoken to another soul in months. When the auctioneer yelled, "$2 sold to the lumberjack," the crowd laughed. But Elias didn't. Something about that woman's silence gripped him harder than any fear he'd known. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her crime. All he knew was this was by nightfall she'd change his life forever. The auction ended under a dim orange sky, the sound of boots fading as the townsfolk dispersed, murmuring about the crazy lumberjack who bought trouble for $2. Elias didn't flinch at their words. He'd seen enough cruelty to know silence was safer than pity. The woman stood still as a fence post, breathing shallowly under the sack tied around her head. He cut her ropes loose, the coarse fibers leaving red welts on her wrists. "You can walk?" he asked quietly. She nodded, no words, no glance. He led her through the barren path toward the forest ridge, to the cabin he'd built with his own hands years ago, back when he still believed in good things. When they arrived, he lit a fire and set down a bowl of stew before her. "Eat," he said. She didn't move. Only after he stepped away did she slowly lift the sack, and that's when Elias froze. Her face wasn't scarred or twisted. It was striking. But her eyes, they were hollow, deep as grief itself. He asked, "What's your name?" She whispered, barely audible, "Don't ask." Elias frowned but didn't press further. That night she sat near the fire, her back to him, as snow began to fall outside the cabin walls. And for the first time in years, Elias couldn't sleep. Because the silence between them wasn't empty. It was watching. Days turned to weeks. She worked around the cabin, cooking, mending, hauling water, without ever speaking her name. Elias started calling her Miss just to fill the air. He noticed things. How she startled at thunder. How she avoided mirrors. How sometimes she stood outside at dawn, staring toward the mountain trail like she was waiting for someone. One evening, while chopping wood, Elias spotted 2 riders far off by the ridge. They didn't belong there. He felt it in his gut, the way they scanned the tree line like hunters. That night he asked her, "Who's looking for you?" She froze mid-step. "No one," he sighed. "I seen riders near the ridge. You don't hide a face like that under a sack for no reason." Her eyes filled with panic. "Please, if they come, just let them take me." "Don't fight." Elias stared, silent. "I don't take orders in my own cabin." She stepped closer, voice trembling. "You don't understand. If they find me here, they'll kill you too." Then she did something strange, pressed her hand against his chest as if to make him promise silence. Elias didn't move. "I've lived through worse than death, miss." Outside, wind howled through the pines. Inside, the fire flickered like it knew something neither of them dared say. They came 3 nights later. Elias woke to the sound of hooves crunching through snow. 6 men, lanterns glowing like angry eyes. He peeked through the shutter. The woman stood behind him, pale as bone. She whispered, "They found me." The lead rider shouted, "We know she's in there." "Step aside, Crane. She's wanted for murder." Elias turned to her. "That true?" Her lips trembled. "They lie," but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. The door shuddered under a heavy kick. Elias grabbed his rifle and stood between her and the door. "You best ride back where you came from," he warned. The man outside sneered. "She slit her husband's throat in Santa Mesa, stole his gold and ran." Elias hesitated, just long enough for her to whisper, "It wasn't gold I took." Then, before he could ask what she meant, the door burst open. Gunfire lit the cabin. Elias dropped one man instantly, but another shot grazed his shoulder. He stumbled, clutching the wound. The woman screamed, a sound like raw sorrow, and grabbed the fallen man's pistol, firing until the rest fled into the trees. Silence followed. Smoke and blood hung thick in the air. Elias looked at her, her hands shaking, her eyes wild, and she whispered, "Now you know why I hid my name." By morning, the snow had stopped. Elias sat by the fire, arm bandaged, staring at the woman as she wrapped her shawl tighter. You saved me, he said quietly. For someone who's running from her past, that's a strange choice. She smiled faintly. Maybe I'm tired of running, he asked again. What's your name? She looked at him, really looked at him, and said, Lydia Crane. The world seemed to tilt. Elias froze. My brother's name was Elias Crane, she said softly. He died 3 winters ago. They told me the man who left our family to chase lumber money never came back. Elias's breath caught. You're my brother's wife? She nodded, tears slipping down her face. I never killed him, Elias. I found him dying and tried to help. But they blamed me, and I ran. Elias sank to his knees, his gun dropping beside him. The weight of truth hit harder than any bullet. He reached for her hand. You could have told me, she whispered. Would you have believed me? He didn't answer. Instead, he stood, walked to the small table and opened the drawer where he kept 2 worn wedding bands. One belonged to his brother. The other had never been used. He took it out, held it to her. Then let's stop running together. Lydia's eyes widened. You'd marry me? He smiled, rough and weary. I already did. The day I paid $2 for a woman no one else saw as human. Outside, the sun broke through the snow clouds, spilling gold across the mountains. And for the first time, the cabin felt like home again. If you made it this far, remember this. Sometimes redemption doesn't come from forgetting the past. It comes from someone who sees your pain and stays anyway. Subscribe for more untold Western tales of loss, love, and the men who stood their ground when the world turned cold.